So now that we've seen modifiers, functions and constructors, let's create a new contract. So we'll close this and we'll right click on the contracts folder and select new file, and we'll just call this messenger.sol. So this is a contract we're going to use to store messages on the blockchain, and we're just going to create the pragma here. So we'll set it to version 0.8.26 and we'll call this contract messenger. And in the last video we looked at how we can create this only owner modifier, and I told you there was an easier way to use only owner, which is to import from a different contract. So let's look at how we can do this here. So OpenZeppelin is basically a security company that has a bunch of Solidity code that they upload here, which is audited by them since they're a security company, and they have a contract for only owner already written. So if we go into their contracts folder here, governance maybe, it's under access, and here's the ownable contract. So we want to click on this, and now we want to select the URL and copy it, and then between the Solidity version and the contract we want to use the import keyword, and then just inside of a string we want to paste the URL we just copied. And now we should get a bunch of stuff here. That's just Remix IDE pulling in the files that we're using. So to use this ownable contract we just brought in, where we're creating our contract, we need to say is ownable. And if you're wondering where this ownable word comes from, it's the name of this contract. So we're saying that our contract inherits from this ownable contract, and this actually takes one parameter which we could pass in here as message.sender. So this will just set the owner, the initial owner, to the person who deploys this contract, but we're not going to pass that in here because I want to show you a different way to do this. So here we can create our constructor, and then we want to say ownable here, and in here we can actually pass the new parameter. So we don't need to pass it up here, we could pass it through in the constructor as well. And here we'll just do message.sender, and if we save this we should see that it compiles correctly, so everything is set up right. And if we just deploy this quickly to see what it looks like, you can see that we have an owner variable already created and it's set to the account that we use to deploy this contract. And there's also a transfer ownership function which we get from inheriting from this contract, and a renounce owner function. So now let's complete this messenger contract which we've been writing, and basically what we wanted to do is anyone who interacts with this contract should be able to send a message, and that will get stored into a list of messages where each user who uses this contract will have their own list associated with their account. So to do this we'll create a mapping, and we'll map address to a string array. And if we think about this, for each address, so each person that's using this contract, we're going to have an array of strings, so all of the messages which they store here, and we'll just call this messages. And now we want to create a function for someone to send messages to our array, and we'll call this function store message. And this function will actually take one parameter up here, so we want to get a string and we want to store it in memory, and for a variable name here we can just type text. I was going to type msg, but remember we have that object called msg.sender already, so we can't use msg here. And we just want to say messages, so that's the mapping we created here. And for an index we'll do message.sender, so messages, and then for a key value here we're passing message.sender, so we're accessing the strings of this address. And we want to say .push text. So we get an error here that our variable doesn't specify visibility, so we need to say public here or private, but this function is going to be public. And actually we can make this function external because we're never going to call it within this contract, we're only going to be calling it from outside. So if we deploy this, we should now see that there's a store message function here, and we can't actually click on this. So now we need to fill in a value here before we can call this function, and we'll just type some random letters here and click on transact, and that goes through. But now we want to create a function to read the messages which are stored inside of this mapping. So we want to create a function, and we'll call it get message, and this will take one value here, which is the index of the message we want to get. So remember, we're storing a whole list of messages here, so this message is going to be a string 0, and then if we push another message in here, it's going to be the second one, and so on. So we want a uint for the ID, and this function is going to be public view, and we're going to return a string. So returns and string, and we're going to get an error here because we need to say memory. So here we're going to take in an ID, and we want to say return messages, so our message mapping, and we want to say from message.sender, and then we want to do the ID of the message, and that's the ID which we're getting from the user here. And now we just want to add in our semicolon, and if we deploy this, we should see that now if we have this get message function here and we type 0 and call it, it'll not go through because we haven't stored anything within our contract yet. So if we call this store message function and we just type a random word here, this will go through. And now if we call get message, it should get back the word we just stored in. And now we can store something else in, so just some random letters, and if we call get message with the ID of 0, it will still get the first message we stored, but if we call it with the ID of 1, we should now get the new message that we stored. So it's saving both messages within that array. And if we switch accounts here and try to call get message 1, we should now get no message here and we get a revert. That's because we're using message.sender here, so each person can only see their own messages. So in the next video, we'll create a function where users can get the messages of other users.